After spending 2 weeks road tripping through New Zealand, we were blown away by some of the most breathtaking landscapes we've ever seen. But the trip also came with a few surprises. In this video, we're sharing our full itinerary and travel tips, and in the second half, we'll talk about the realities of traveling here and a few things we wish we would have known before planning our trip. If you want a more in-depth look at any of these places, we've made full videos on all of them, so be sure to check those out after this one. We kicked off our trip by flying into Auckland, but instead of staying, we caught a connecting flight straight to Christchurch to start our itinerary in the South Island. We spent our first afternoon walking around Christchurch and then called it an early night to sleep off the jet lag, something we highly recommend doing after a long haul flight. The next morning we stocked up on groceries at Pack and Save, which is basically New Zealand's version of Walmart. This saved us a ton of money compared to eating out every day. Then we hit the road for a 3-hour drive to Twizel, our base for the next 3 days. Twizel is a perfect halfway point between Lake Tekapo and Mount Cook National Park, making it a great place to stay if you're exploring both. One of the first things we noticed was that the water in New Zealand is unbelievably blue. Lake Tekapo is famous for it, but if we're being honest, Lake Pukaki was even better. It has the same vibrant blue color, but with an epic view of Mount Cook in the background. We were also lucky enough to see some lupins starting to bloom. If you want to see them at their best, visit in late November or early December. On our second day, we planned to hike the Hooker Valley track, but rain and clouds rolled in, so instead, we drove around and stumbled upon a hidden gem that ended up being one of our favorite places in New Zealand, Lake Ohau. There was not a single other person in sight, and there were some insane mountain views. We also stumbled upon a lavender field, which is probably worth a stop if you're in the area. That night, we finally got what we came here for, stargazing in the Aoraki Mackenzie Dark Sky Reserve. After 2 cloudy nights, the sky finally cleared at 2 a.m., and we saw some of the best stars of our lives. The next day, we finally hiked Hooker Valley. This is one of the best hikes in New Zealand, and you absolutely have to do it while you're here. Start early because it gets very busy very fast. After that, we drove 3 hours to Wanaka and spent the evening walking around town, seeing #ThatWanakaTree and exploring the local shops. It's such a peaceful town, and we recommend spending at least one night here. We had planned to hike Roy's Peak, one of New Zealand's most famous viewpoints, but at 10 miles round trip with over 4,000 feet of elevation gain, it's not an easy hike. If you're up for it, you should absolutely do it, but we decided to skip it this time. Next, we drove to Queenstown, where we spent the evening down by the waterfront. Watching the sunset with live music playing in the background is definitely something to put on your Queenstown bucket list. The next morning, we had a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, a tour of Doubtful Sound. To get here, you have to take a bus, a boat, another bus, and then finally reach the fjord. It's remote, it's quiet, and it's absolutely stunning. We saw dolphins, incredible landscapes, and even had a moment of silence to take in the stillness of this untouched place. If you're debating between Milford Sound and Doubtful Sound, we'll talk about why we skipped Milford in the second half of this video. After that, we fully embraced the fact that Queenstown is the adventure capital of the world. We took a jet boat ride with Shotover Jet, and it was one of the most fun things we did on the entire trip. We definitely recommend it. We also stopped by the original bungee jump site, but just to watch, maybe next time. We also had to try the world famous Ferg burger. It was good, but was it the best burger in the world? We'll let you decide. After a few more days slowly enjoying Queenstown, we wrapped up our South Island adventure and caught a flight to Auckland to start the North Island portion of our trip. After landing in Auckland, we immediately drove 2 hours south to Mata Mata to visit Hobbiton. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, this is an absolute must. We walked through Bag End, had a drink at the Green Dragon Inn, and even got to go inside of a hobbit hole. Next, we drove up to the Coromandel Peninsula, where we spent a few days exploring some of New Zealand's best beaches. We went to Cathedral Cove, an iconic beach with a super cool cave that was featured in the Chronicles of Narnia. We went to Hot Water Beach, where you can dig your own hot tub in the sand. Sounds amazing, right? Well, it didn't exactly go as planned. The best part of the Coromandel Peninsula was that there were so many untouched and uncrowded beaches here, making it such a great place to slow down and relax at the end of our trip. We wrapped up our trip with 3 nights in Auckland, where we explored the city, tried some great food, and visited the Auckland Museum, which has an amazing exhibit on Maori culture and history. Definitely worth a stop. And that brings us to our final night in New Zealand. We drove 40 minutes from Auckland to a black sand beach called Piha Beach, and we're here to think about our week and tell you how travel here isn't always as easy or cheap as social media makes it look. In the next part of this video, we're breaking down the realities of traveling here and the things we wish we would have known when we were planning our trip. We have absolutely loved it here, and it's definitely one of our favorite locations we've ever been to, but there were some things we didn't expect, and we want to share those with you, so hopefully they can make your trip better. First of all, the drives will always be longer than you expect. We have had so many drives on this trip where on Google Maps it says 2 hours and it ends up taking us 3. And those 3 hours feel like 6 hours because the roads are so windy and bumpy. They just drag on forever.
I completely underestimated the fact that I would get as motion sick as I did, but the roads are seriously so windy. You're going around lakes, you're going over mountains, so that's something to keep in mind if you're somebody who gets motion sick, or if you're somebody who doesn't get motion sick. Expect to get a little bit motion sick here. Do not underestimate them like we did.
That first point leads into our second point, which is that the locations here are very remote. We kind of did a very typical itinerary. It wasn't too unique, but we found that every spot we wanted to go to was 3 to 4 hours from each other. These really long and painful for Taylor drives because of her motion sickness. We had to do it like every other day. Because of that, kind of towards the end of our week in the South Island, it was a little bit too much driving. The day before, we went on a trip to Doubtful Sound. It took us 2.5 hours by bus, then you get on a boat, then you get on another bus, and then we got on a 3-hour boat, and then had to do it all again to get back home that night. So it was a lot of driving. The next day we had the plan to go to Milford Sound, which is one of our main reasons for coming to New Zealand. We ended up choosing not to go because of how long the driving would be. And Milford Sound, it's like one of the most popular things to do here, but the only way to get there is to stay in Tianu. From Tianu, it is 2.5 hours of driving to get to Milford Sound. Definitely keep in mind as you are planning your itineraries, just know that there will be a lot of driving and these areas are very remote.
The next thing that we kind of expected, but didn't expect it to be that bad, was the sun. We had heard that the New Zealand sun just hit a little bit different here. You had to be really on top of it with the sunscreen, but we didn't expect it to be as bad as it was.
Very rarely ever been burnt in my life, and I put on sunscreen and still just got wrecked by the sun. So don't underestimate it. Put on a lot of sunscreen and wear a sun hoodie if you're going hiking. You just have to be very careful. Another thing to keep in mind when you're coming here is just know that prices for accommodations are very high. They were definitely the highest prices for accommodations out of anywhere we've been this year. And this is our 10th or 11th country this year. So you got to plan a big budget for your accommodations. But another thing we didn't expect is outside of accommodations, most other things were not that badly priced. Food prices, groceries were a lot better than we were expecting.
But the cost of the adventure activities are definitely high. So plan ahead and keep a budget for it because you do not want to miss out on them.
Especially in Queenstown, the adventure capital of the world. Another thing to keep in mind is that the scenery might not always be what you expect. We have seen some of the most beautiful things we've ever seen here, but at the same time, some of the spots we went to weren't quite what we were expecting. We spent a couple nights in Lake Tekapo. There were some really beautiful things about that area, but it was just a lake, and it was just a lake with blue water, and other than that, it was very dry, and there were just small hills. Come with the expectation that not everything's gonna be everything you were hoping for, and remember that those videos you see on Instagram are very edited. It's not gonna look exactly like it did in the video. On our trip to Doubtful Sound, we really wanted to go there because we saw a video of what it looks like after a rainstorm, and there were literally hundreds of waterfalls. Unbelievably beautiful, and when we went, there hadn't been rain in a few days, so it was pretty dry. And so if you're coming with the expectation that you're going to Doubtful Sound to see those waterfalls, they might not always be there.
Another thing to not underestimate about New Zealand is how quick the weather can change. With that being said, try to allow yourself a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to activities. So we went to Lake Tekapo, and Lake Tekapo is in a dark sky reserve, which means the stars are amazing. And we had the plan of being out all night and looking at the stars, and that wasn't the case for us because of how the weather was. It was so cloudy that you couldn't see the stars. And then the next night, it was cloudy until 3 a.m. So we woke up at 3 a.m. to go see the stars, and we're only able to see it for about an hour. Give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. The weather is super unpredictable, especially when you're planning these trips so far in advance, you just don't really know.
Yeah, if you're going to Lake Tekapo to see the stars, make sure you give yourself 2 or 3 nights to give the weather a chance to be good so that you can see the stars. So basically, the main thing that we learned from this trip and from all of our other trips we've done, that this is just a really important rule to have anytime you're traveling, is just don't expect everything to go perfectly. Like I was saying earlier, on Instagram, everything is perfect because these creators, it's their job to come here and they'll spend 5 days just waiting for that perfect sunset. And you might get here and not get that sunset. You might not see the hundreds of waterfalls at Doubtful Sound. You might not see the amazing stars in Lake Tekapo.
And you might miss going to one of the most famous attractions in New Zealand, just like us.
If you're going to travel, just make sure that you're gonna be okay with things not going perfectly, because even if 5 of your days here don't go perfectly, you still have a couple other days that make it all worth it. Since we've said a lot of negative things about New Zealand, this place that we love so much, we just really quick want to say a few things that we absolutely loved about this place and some positive things that we didn't expect.
Something that we absolutely love about New Zealand is that the national parks are free, which is pretty unheard of in countries where tourism is high.
Another thing, it's a pro and a con that everything is so remote. It's hard to get to these places, but the amazing thing about that is that it leaves them very untouched. You can go to beaches and there's no garbage because people can't drive to the beach. You have to do this hike or you gotta take a boat ride to get there. So many, like Doubtful Sound was just, it was like there was no human impact there. It was all just so natural and beautiful because it was so hard to reach, so not that many people get to see it. Just remember that a con can always actually be a pro, like with our Doubtful Sound trip. We didn't get the rainy, gloomy weather with hundreds of waterfalls, but instead we got a really sunny day, and because of that, the dolphins were out, and it was one of the most amazing moments of our life. We loved it so much.
Along with the dolphins being one of our favorite moments on this trip, another thing that we absolutely loved was the adventure capital of the world, Queenstown. It was amazing, and you'd think with the adventure capital of the world would just be hectic all the time, but it was seriously so relaxing. Every night we were there, we'd go to the main area on the lakefront and watch the sunset along with hundreds of other people. It was such a fantastic vibe. It was seriously so much fun. Everybody was just so happy, enjoying the sunset. I don't know, that was seriously one of our favorite parts.
Definitely recommend a lot of days in Queenstown. It's incredible. So with all of that said, we absolutely love this country. We are really excited to come back someday, and it was 2 of the most amazing weeks of travel that we've ever had.
So we hope that sharing our experience can help you better plan for New Zealand and have a fantastic time while you're here.
Make sure to go subscribe because we appreciate each and every person who does. We are really trying to grow this channel and we're having so much fun with it. Go watch the rest of our New Zealand videos and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Killed that. Okay.
Killed that.